So now that the stage has been magically, or not magically, reset, let's dive into another aspect of the engineering practice that is, again, very core to culture. That is quality. I've personally felt the impact of our next speaker's approach to quality practice, even though we have never worked in the same team in the 5 years that I've been in the same company with him. His style of communication, insights, and the pragmatic approach to influence is something to be admired, something that you can just feel and see from afar from the way he talks and things. And so I'm delighted to welcome Adam Howard, an engineering manager.
All right. Hello, everyone. I was worried we might be in the post-lunch lull, but you all were rowdy enough to require free claps from Prey there, so that's good news. So yeah, my name is Adam, and I've been in the quality space for like 12 years, and I still apparently can't resist using quality as an adjective and a noun successively. It's a joke I never get tired of, but here we are. I'm here today to talk about the quality engineering domain within engineering, and more specifically, how I've attempted to foster a culture of quality engineering in my work. So my employer is a bit shy about people representing them sometimes. So I want to assure you this is all very much based in my experience at work, and I'll doubtless mention them a few times along the way. But please do me the kindness of remembering this is purely my views as an individual. And if I happen to say the word Xero at any point, it definitely starts with a Z, okay? So, yeah, before we get into the meat of it, I want to ensure that we all know what we're talking about when we say culture. It's kind of a slippery notion. We've heard lots about it today already, but you know, lunch and panels and excitement, we might have blank minds by now. So for me, the way that I think about culture is it's the sort of intangible social goo that a group of people sort of float around in. And crucially, that goo is created by, or I suppose more actually emerges from, the experiences of the people in a community. And when I think about those social experiences, there's three main things that shape culture. There's the values that people hold, so the things that are important to them, the things that they hold dear, the beliefs that shape the way that they see the world. There's the behaviors, the things that people actually do, how they conduct themselves, the actions that they choose to take. And finally, there's the interactions, the way that people's values and behaviors intersect, and the way, in essence, that people have an effect on each other and the world around them. And with that in mind, culture is a constantly shifting, evolving thing. The culture of New Zealand now is very different to what it was, say, even 3-4 years ago. Our shared experiences of a global pandemic, a cost of living crisis. I've knocked the thing off. Sorry. Do we need to put that back on?
I'm going to keep talking if you can.
I gesture too much. Yeah, that's okay. That's my fault. We're back. Sorry. All of the potentially great and terrible things that have happened over the last couple of years, they've forever changed the things that we value, the ways that we behave, and how we interact with one another and our environment. And those changes mean that the intangible goo that is our shared culture is now different. What it feels like to live in and experience life as a New Zealander is different. Because while culture is intangible in the sense that you can't touch it or even easily describe it, as I'm demonstrating, we all feel it. To a greater or lesser degree, we all live in culture, and sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's bad. It's also precisely why shaping culture or changing it is something really powerful. If we can change the culture that we're a part of, we can change the experiences of ourselves and others for better or for worse. Crucially, we must remember, though, that we can't change culture directly. It's an abstract, emergent, intangible thing, and so you cannot simply mold it in a given direction. So no matter how much your CEO or your senior leaders want to, instill a great culture in your organization, they can't just tell you and make it happen, which doesn't stop people trying. Surprisingly common to see people have a crack at that. But it won't work just to say, this is our culture now, because it emerges from people, and people are also quite hard to change. But let's have a go. So pivoting slightly to my day job, here I am, a big old nerd walking in on day one at a job in which I was hired to help improve the practice of quality engineering. They didn't actually say that, though. They kind of said, we have a problem with quality. But to me, that's what it meant. It meant, please build the quality engineering capability of our teams. And I was pretty nervous about that, actually. It's a big global company. And even before I joined, I knew that they moved fast and they did lots of things. And I also quickly learned when I started that the teams had heaps of autonomy to choose how they worked and what they did. And in some ways, this was really good. But it also meant there was a lot of unhelpful diversity in terms of how they did things. And this was especially true in the quality engineering space, where there hadn't really been any technical or strategic leadership for a little while. And so lots of teams were doing their best, but they were all solving the same problem in different ways and with differing degrees of success. So I approached with caution because it really felt like I might be trying to put stuff back into Pandora's box. They'd had the freedom to choose how they were doing things, and then this guy sort of comes along out of nowhere and might try and tell them, oh, maybe you should do it differently. So this anxiety was kind of rooted in my unfamiliarity with the culture, though I wasn't conscious of that at the time. At this stage, I didn't know that I was going to instigate a cultural change. That wasn't my grand plan. But clearly my instinct as a new entrant into this community was to respect the culture, not to go in there and just disregard it and muck it up. I'd seen someone attempt that kind of approach in a previous job. They sort of brought the culture of their prior organization and tried to apply it like a paste over the top of a new and unfamiliar canvas. And it didn't work out well for the cultural colonizer, and I wasn't about to make that same mistake. But I did intend to succeed in building capability, and I decided that the way to do it was not through colonization of ideas or conquering of hierarchy, it was through enablement. In reality, I think I recognized that the only way I could achieve the scale of change that I was aiming for was to help the people and the teams themselves to be the real drivers behind that change. If I could enable them, then they would change the culture for me. So the first thing that I set about doing was building a community. It was pretty clear to me that communities of practice were a big thing at Xero. There wasn't a healthy community around quality engineering, though. There were relics. There was, a dusty old Confluence space. There was a largely dormant Slack channel, but nobody was talking about quality engineering, at least not outside of their direct teams. And so I knew this had to be one of the first things that I focused on. Because I'd also quickly discovered that there were a lot of super talented, super smart people who cared about quality all around the place. Some of them were quality specialists, whether QAs or quality coaches. But a lot were also developers, engineers who were just really passionate about delivering high quality software. And what's more, they typically knew that they needed a bit of help. They wanted it in a lot of cases. So they were actually kind of stoked when I went sticking my nose in. And that started to allay some of my fears about, pulling off that reverse Pandora's box maneuver. They were eager to learn, not just from me, but from others about how they could solve some of their challenges. They were stuck in silos, but it wasn't through choice. There just hadn't been any visible champions of quality making any noise for a while. So I established a community of practice and raised a metaphorical flag. This meant we suddenly made quality engineering visible in the organization again. We brought people together to talk about quality, and we created a space where it was worthwhile, talking about testing and testability, where you could ask questions about your automation challenges, where you could see if anyone had any experience with accessible design or non-functional requirements. And of course, this all doesn't just happen. I made it part of my job to nurture this community. I relentlessly annoyed people to talk at our fortnightly sessions. And this was easy enough for a while because I'd made it my job to also find out all of the cool things that were happening in the quality space around Xero so I could queue them up. But over time, it gets harder. You run through all of the easy, obvious topics. You have to dig deeper, persuade more subtly. And crucially, you need to make the forum accessible to all the different people, regardless of their level of expertise, of their confidence, of what their first language might be, of what time zone they exist in. So we ran different types of sessions, lean coffees, talks, QAs, screenings of conference talks and other videos. And we recorded them all and we reran them for a Northern Hemisphere time zone and constantly learned and refined. So it took a lot of time and a lot of energy, but I knew how important it was. And so, kept running this community as part of my day job. It still is to this day. because I knew that what we needed to start to build capability in quality engineering was a space in which people could interact meaningfully. They needed to learn from their peers. They also needed to realize that they could teach their peers a thing or two as well. So talking about it made it real, made it valuable, and made it important, and that was a good start. The second step needed to build on the momentum of that first one. So Xero remained kind of a hopelessly large place, and I was still just one person trying to enable a company with, probably close to 1,000 engineers across a literally unknowable number of teams. I still can't tell you how many, and scattered around the globe on at least 4 continents and 5 major time zones. So I knew I needed to try and provide a way for all of those people to feel confident in their quality engineering choices without all of them having to queue up to talk to me. Frankly, I don't enjoy talking that much, which probably sounds ironic standing in front of a room full of people. So I realized that my second major challenge would be to establish a set of principles for quality engineering at Xero. So a principle is a fundamental proposition that is the foundation for a system of belief or behavior or chain of reasoning. In other words, it's a key idea or tenet that underpins and influences the way that we think, act, and decide. We all have personal principles, knowingly or unknowingly, that sort of help us navigate the world on a daily basis. Now, I wanted to craft a set of principles that would help engineers and teams navigate the quality engineering world confidently, and that could guide their decisions and their actions in a way that would be consistent with our overall journey. Of course, at this point, I still felt like a relative interloper into this community. So I really, really didn't want to simply inscribe some principles on some stone tablets and sort of proclaim them to be the word of the quality gods. Instead, I wanted to tap into my burgeoning community and truly extract the values that were already in place at Xero. So I ran a whole host of workshops with all different people at different time zones. We worked through several exercises in each, framing prompts like positively, what's good about quality, what do we love? Negatively, what are our challenges, what are we struggling with? And aspirationally, what do you wish your world looked like? And it was super fascinating. I got to meet loads of new people, which was useful, and I learned heaps about the organization and made lots of connections and, sowed the seeds of future collaboration along the way. And when I was done, I collated all the data that we'd collected and then hacked and shaped it down into groups and then into themes and then wordsmithed it into 5 proposed principles. I took those principles, played them back to the community, and with a few minor tweaks, through that feedback, we had them, our fundamental propositions for what quality engineering at Xero ought to be. And honestly, it doesn't even really matter what they actually are. What's important is that they exist and they were drawn from the community. We effectively came together and decided the things that are most valued at Xero in the practice of quality engineering. With that, we gave ourselves some really clear decision-making principles that meant that any team could ask themselves, this thing that we're doing, does it align to our principles? And so that meant that not only did many engineers and teams feel a legitimate sense of ownership over those principles, because they'd literally helped to shape them, but it gave us a device through which we started to sort of slowly and steadily converge towards a more consistent practice where we would all be aligned in certain ways. And it also sort of managed to maintain a sense of autonomy for teams as well, since they were still empowered to design the specifics of their approach as long as they were aligned fundamentally to those principles. Now, I've since used these principles countless times and in countless ways to sort of help shape and evolve the development of quality engineering at Xero, and I've seen others do the same as well. But what I'm most proud of is that each time I look back over them, they feel more and more like they reflect what I'm actually seeing happening around me. So things have started to shift. And that brings us to the third example of the things I've been doing to kind of enable capability growth at Xero. Because once we had the great foundation of a community and some shared principles, we could get stuck into the more practical elements, helping to directly shape what teams were doing in their day-to-day. Now, this has been the main bulk of the work that I've done at Xero. I now have 3 lead engineers as part of my team, each of them specialists in various areas of quality engineering, and the 4 of us continue to support that globally scaled organization. I could talk for days about this and, hit me up later if that's your jam. But for now, I'll focus on one example. So we recognized really quickly that the bulk of automated testing that was happening at Xero was of the end-to-end persuasion. It was made up of Selenium tests that were, in the way of Selenium tests, a bit flaky, a bit slow, a bit blunt. We also knew that we were increasingly moving towards a distributed architecture, modernizing services away from sort of big old monoliths and building more granular, dedicated services and microservices. And it was clear that the existing practices and tools that teams had at their disposal weren't going to, help them to automate the right tests in the right way for these new systems that they were building. So crucially, we knew that we needed to enable our teams in this rapidly distributing world to be self-reliant, that they couldn't be hamstrung by having to deploy and test against the myriad of distributed services that they had dependencies on, all in one integrated space with long, kind of laborious and complicated end-to-end tests. So in short, we recognized that the practice of contract testing was going to unlock a lot of value for a lot of teams. But crucially, almost nobody was doing it, and we wanted to change that. So step one was to find the team that were interested in the practice. We helped them understand the approach. We built out a proof of concept. That meant getting to grips with Pact, our tool of choice, with standing up an internally hosted Pact broker that would manage the contracts. And so we did all that, we tried it all out, and we saw the value and the gains start to happen pretty quickly. So then we shouted about it a bit. We went back to the community of practice, we showed it off, we sort of gauged the interest from more people, more teams, kind of validating our bet that this was a practice that teams would find compelling, that they would see the value in it, and that would jump out at them as solving a problem that maybe they hadn't even entirely realized that they had or would have. So the next step was to streamline it or scale it for more teams. So we didn't want each and every team in the organization to need to stand up and host their own Pact broker. So we licensed Pactflow, a software as a service offering that took the cognitive load of doing that off of the plates of each individual team. It also added a good deal of safety and security by minimizing the amount of infrastructure that we would need to configure internally. So we set that up, we put licensing processes in place, and we sorted out user management for teams as well. We also knew we'd need to ensure that teams could easily run these newfangled sort of contract tests wherever they needed to. And so we developed and published helpers and webhooks for our CI/CD pipelines so that teams could easily trigger builds from a software as a service broker that lived on the public internet without any security issues and without them having to figure it all out for themselves. And of course, along the way, we wrote guides about the practice of contract testing and how it varies from regular integration testing, the different value that it provides. We wrote about the tools themselves, how to get started, how to configure it for their team, how to get licenses, and then how to start building tests. And of course, we regularly demoed all of this back to the community and sought input, and indeed had help from the early adopters in proving the tooling that we were providing. This means that it's really easy now for a team at Xero to understand whether contract testing is a practice that they ought to be partaking of, depending on the component that they're building and what type of dependencies that they have. And if they ought to be, it's super easy for them to get started. There's a supported tooling platform, there's guiding material, and there's also, us as an enablement team and a whole community around them for help to get them going. So it was in this way, by investing in building knowledge, by providing hands-on sort of coaching alongside teams, and by developing specific tools and templates, we've reduced the barrier to entry for the practices that will add value for our teams. Not just contract testing, but a whole host of others as well. And as such, we're seeing more and more of those behaviors start to happen out there in the wild, all without ever sort of having to tell anyone that they had to do something. So we started with culture, and then we talked about quality engineering, and it's time to cross those streams, because while I thought that I was building capability, I realized at some point along the way that what was more important was actually that I was also influencing the culture of quality engineering at Xero. There's a pretty clear moment where I remember this happening, actually. So I'd been rocking along, sort of doing stuff, a lot of stuff that I've talked about already, and it was going pretty well. People were excited. We started to see some shifts. There was kind of, the sound of quality engineering was in the air. And then I got one of those really annoying requests from my boss's boss. We were sat down talking about it, and he was like, "Adam, this is great. You're really making a difference. I want to see if we can do the same thing in other domains. So can you share your model with me so that we can show it to other teams?" And what I said was, "Yes, Paul." I can definitely share with you the model that I definitely have. But what I thought was, shit, now I've got to invent a model. So, of course, I did have a model in the same way that an exploratory tester always has a model that they're testing against, but might not be super cognizant of it. Ironically, I'd spent years coaching testers to make their models explicit and visible, and here I was caught in my own trap, an internalized model full of tacit and almost unconscious knowledge. So this request turned out to be a great thing, because in sitting down and extracting the model from my brain and interrogating it a bit, I discovered that at some point I had unknowingly realized that I needed to create a cultural shift in the quality engineering landscape, and was taking steps to sort of achieve that, because that was the only way that the work that we were doing was really going to scale. So in previous jobs, I'd been a direct influencer. I knew all the engineers and testers. I could run workshops for them, have regular conversations, jump in when they had incidents, and participate in the learning from those challenges. At Xero, that wasn't going to fly, and I'd recognized that even unconsciously, and started to build out an enablement model that could scale, and without even knowing it, was set up to influence the culture of quality engineering as well. So here's the model, or at least a simplified representation of it. It's based on sort of 3 core pillars, but everything is really in service of my team's mission statement, which is that we want to enable the rapid delivery of quality products. That's what we exist for, and while we obviously highlight that quality is self-evidently crucial, so is speed. We want to ensure we're supporting teams to work at the sort of cadence that Xero and any modern agile software delivery company demands. The pillars, though. The first one is that we need to really clearly ensure that teams understand what success looks like for them in quality engineering. We have to define great quality engineering so that they can work towards it. And we do this in a number of ways. So we've covered the principles. They give teams a high-level, aligned set of sort of fundamental propositions that can guide their choices and their actions. The vision is the next really important part. So that sets out an aspirational view of what quality engineering at Xero can be. And I really like this way of framing it. When we're working with teams and asking them to change and asking them to do the work, why often comes up is why are we investing this effort in it? And I find that this aspirational view of a description of what the experience of quality can be like in the future is a really nice way of sort of framing that and helping them to connect to it. We also have a standard for quality engineering. It's part of a wider set of engineering standards, and that sets the baseline expectations for what teams need to be doing now. I see the standard as the start of our journey, so the present, and I see the vision as the future that we're working towards. And then we also help teams to measure their quality engineering, both their level of capability, but also the resultant quality of their products. For the former, we use a scorecard where teams are empowered to identify how confident they are in quality throughout the life cycle. And then for the latter, they're all proxies that we use because we can't objectively measure quality. So things like test automation coverage and SLOs are our main tools here. Of course, just knowing what great quality engineering looks like isn't enough. Teams also need to have the knowledge, the skills, and the tools to actually go and enact that definition and to bring it into reality. So that's the second pillar, this pure enablement piece. A big part of that is knowledge, capability, and growth. And so we do that through providing clear guidance, written stuff that can be consumed asynchronously, but also more targeted education efforts, workshops that we develop internally, stuff that we find externally to actually grow skills and knowledge and concepts in our people and teams. Of course, a lot of software engineering is inherently practical, and learning by doing is often the most effective. So we also try and spend as much time as we can working with teams in practice in their day-to-day, coaching them and helping them to implement stuff, learning alongside us, and sort of creating lasting capability through that genuine practice. And just as importantly, we also invest really heavily in providing the tools that will allow people to perform that great quality engineering. Each team shouldn't have to assess the landscape for every tool and every need that they have. We can do that for them. We know the technologies that we largely work with. We know the context that we largely operate in. And so we can choose the best solution for most teams. And we can integrate that into accelerators and our templates for different component types and stuff like that. Even with all of that, giving people that definition and giving people that capability isn't necessarily going to be enough. For genuine capability growth to occur, you also need to create the space and the culture for them to succeed in achieving it. That means ensuring that everyone understands the value of getting better at quality engineering. So what's in it for them? Wow, I'm running out of time, so let's speed up. This last column. So yeah, lots of engaging with people who are in programs of work, making sure we build quality outcomes into the program outcomes. And yeah, day-to-day propaganda of writing blog posts and just sticking my nose in places where it needs to. And the community that exists starts to do peer-to-peer work across the place. So this is kind of the basic model for how we're enabling quality engineering at Xero. It's not finished, it's not done, but it seems to be working so far. And there's some correlations to some things that we heard about earlier. So it's pretty easy to draw a line from those three pillars to the values, behaviors, and interactions that are those things that shape culture that we talked about at the start. When we're defining what great quality engineering looks like, we're really saying, here are the things that we value, the things that we think are important, the things that we believe in. When we're enabling quality engineering through building knowledge, skills, and tools, we're directly influencing the ability of our engineers and teams to perform certain practices. We're helping them to do those specific things. And when we're advocating for quality engineering capability growth as something that's important, we bring together people to talk about quality engineering and to create intersection between people who might not otherwise have both recognized that they have, a shared goal or a common interest in quality engineering. So ultimately, my enablement model for quality engineering at Xero is a model that provides direct ways to influence the factors that contribute to culture. By defining principles, enabling practices, and advocating for communities, we start to affect the values and behaviors and interactions of the community at Xero in a way that ought to cause a more quality engineering optimized culture to emerge. So, importantly, I want to highlight that this isn't just about quality engineering. Aside from the mission statement, nothing on that model was specific to quality engineering. And I want to share this model because I think it's something that you can take back and apply in your context as well. All you really need to do is to find your own levers for those values, behaviors, and interactions. For me, this translated first into principles, practice, and community, and then evolved when I thought more consciously about it into the define, enable, and advocate that the model is now built around. But you can find your own levers, add your own labels, and work in your context to make that appropriate. Remember that your culture will have its own way of changing, just as ours did. We should also revisit that lesson from the start of the talk that culture is an emergent property, so you can't change it directly. And even trying to trigger changes on a smaller scale is really difficult. So this is where something called the law of diffusion of innovation comes in and is really your friend. This is the idea that you shouldn't even try and influence all of a community at once. Instead, focus on identifying those early adopters and willing participants who will self-select into a good idea and be valuable contributors to your change. Once you start changing them, their values, their behaviors, and their interactions will start to show in the community, and that will start to shape the culture and bring more people on board. Then, slowly but surely, you see others come along and say, whoa, that looks cool. Can we get involved? And if that isn't fostering a quality culture, then I don't know what is. I didn't make my slides look this pretty. Look them up. It's really cool. But that's a wrap from me. I really hope you took something from this talk. I love enablement and I love culture, the great topics. So thank you to the NZ Tech Rally crew for inviting me along. Thanks to you all for listening. And I'll take questions later or online.